It's late at night. Your phone is in your hand, scrolling again, even though you're tired. You promised yourself you'd be present. You wanted to meditate. You meant to write or just sit in silence for a while. But here you are again, consumed by the screen, lost in the noise. If this feels familiar, you're not alone. But this pattern isn't just about habit. And it's not just about technology. It's about your psyche. About what you're running from. About the parts of yourself you've exiled, avoided, or numbed. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." What if your addiction to distraction is not a flaw in your discipline, but a message from your unconscious? What if your nervous system is addicted not to stimulation, but to escape? This video isn't here to tell you to turn off your phone. It's here to ask why you can't. It's here to explore the parts of you that need distraction to feel safe and the depth that waits when you no longer run. Because what you're calling lack of focus might actually be fear of presence. And what you're avoiding in silence may be the very thing that will heal you. Most people treat distraction like a surface-level issue. They install productivity apps, turn off notifications, follow time management hacks, believing that if they could just focus harder, everything would fall into place. But distraction isn't the disease, it's the symptom. It's the outward expression of an inner fragmentation. Beneath your inability to stay present is a system, psychological and emotional, that has learned to flee from silence, from discomfort, from truth. Carl Jung believed that what we repress doesn't disappear, it becomes active beneath the surface, influencing our behavior without our awareness. So when you find yourself reaching for your phone compulsively, zoning out in front of the TV, or obsessively multitasking, you're not failing. You're coping. You're responding to signals from within that you may not yet fully understand. Distraction isn't a moral flaw or a modern glitch. It's the psyche's attempt to regulate something that feels overwhelming. The reason your attention feels fractured isn't because your willpower is weak. It's because your emotional landscape is turbulent. There's an unspoken fear that if you sit still, if you allow space, something inside you will rise, something old, something unresolved. Jung called this the return of the repressed. Distraction becomes a smokescreen that protects you from confronting what's buried deep, unprocessed grief, childhood wounds, existential anxiety. So the urge to check your phone for the 100th time today isn't about curiosity, it's about escape. And until we acknowledge what we're running from, no amount of digital detox will bring us back home to ourselves. Our culture rewards distraction because it numbs discomfort. Productivity becomes the socially acceptable drug, and busyness becomes the armor we wear to avoid deeper questions. What are you distracting yourself from? That's the question most never dare to ask. Because to ask it is to risk undoing the scaffolding of control that's held you together for years. But Jung teaches that real transformation begins when we turn toward the symptoms, not to suppress them, but to listen. Distraction is a messenger, not an enemy. It's saying, something inside you needs attention. When we stop treating distraction as failure and start treating it as feedback, we open a door. And behind that door isn't more discipline, it's self-understanding. The moment you stop trying to conquer distraction and begin to understand it, the entire dynamic shifts. What would happen if, instead of judging your scattered attention, you became curious about it? What if every moment you drift away is a signal, a breadcrumb, leading you back to a part of yourself that's hurting, forgotten, or silenced? Distraction is not laziness. It's the soul signaling that something beneath the surface is unresolved, unloved, unintegrated. When you compulsively scroll, binge, or avoid, it's not because you're weak, it's because a younger version of you learned that silence was unsafe, that stillness meant danger, that presence came with pain. This is not a productivity problem. It's a trauma-informed reality. Distraction, then, is not the obstacle to healing, it's the invitation. And the moment you stop fighting it, you may begin to hear what it's been trying to say all along. Silence is often romanticized, pictured as peaceful, sacred, restorative. But for many people, silence is terrifying. When the external noise fades, the internal noise gets louder. In the absence of distraction, the unconscious begins to speak, and it rarely whispers comfort at first. Instead, it offers what Carl Jung would describe as the voices of the shadow, the neglected, the suppressed, the rejected. These are the parts of you that surface in stillness, the pain you never grieved, the emotions you learned to push down, the truths you couldn't face. So when you find yourself fidgeting in silence, reaching for your phone after only a few seconds of quiet, it's not just boredom, it's fear. Not of silence itself, but of what silence reveals. Stillness becomes threatening not because of what's missing, but because of what might be found. Many of us were never taught how to be with ourselves. We were taught to achieve, to perform, to please, to exist in the eyes of others. So when we're finally alone, without performance, without productivity, without validation, we encounter a void. But this void isn't empty. It's full of echoes, memories, unmet needs. Jung referred to this as the process of individuation, the journey of meeting the whole self, not just the parts that are socially acceptable. The silence you avoid is sacred territory. It's the place where the real work begins. But because we're conditioned to associate silence with absence, of love, of connection, of meaning, we run from it. We fill it with noise. But the truth is that silence is trying to speak, not to harm you, but to heal you. If only you'd stay long enough to listen. Stillness is where the unconscious rises. This is why meditation, solitude, and deep rest are so often avoided. Not because they're difficult in themselves, but because they create a container where the psyche can no longer hide. The ego resists silence because silence is a mirror, and what you see there is not always what you want to. You might meet shame, rage, grief, longing, the fractured parts of your identity that were once denied a voice. But Jung's work shows us that these parts are not enemies. They are wounded aspects of the self longing for integration. Silence doesn't expose you to pain. It introduces you to the parts of you that carry pain, waiting to be acknowledged. And through that acknowledgement, healing begins. The goal is not to escape the silence, but to become strong enough to sit inside it and tender enough to listen. When you stop running from silence, something profound begins to shift. What once felt like a void begins to feel like a womb holding something alive, growing, waiting to be born. The initial discomfort gives way to recognition. You start to see that the silence was never trying to punish you. It was trying to reconnect you to yourself. In the modern world, we confuse stimulation with connection and distraction with relief, but neither touches the soul. Only in silence do we meet the self beneath the performance. Only in stillness do we discover the layers we've buried. And only when we choose to stay despite the discomfort can those buried parts begin to speak. Silence, then, is not the absence of life. It's where life finally has a chance to reach you, fully and without disguise. Asterisk, long before you reached for your first smartphone, your nervous system was already learning how to escape, not with devices, but with defense mechanisms. When you were a child and faced moments of overwhelming emotion, shame, fear, rejection, you didn't have the tools to process those experiences. Instead, your body adapted. It learned to flee inwardly, to dissociate, to numb, to scan for threats and avoid vulnerability. Jung saw this adaptation as a survival instinct embedded in the psyche. Parts of the self split off and became unconscious in order to protect the fragile core. As you grew older, this internal pattern didn't disappear. It became habitual, automatic. So when your adult life becomes quiet, and that old fear rises again, your body does what it always did, it escapes. Only now, the escape looks like scrolling, multitasking, consuming. You're not lazy. You're conditioned. And that pattern runs deeper than technology ever could. Your nervous system isn't interested in your spiritual growth, it's interested in your survival. That means it will prioritize safety over truth every time. And truth, for many of us, feels unsafe. Stillness feels unsafe. Vulnerability feels unsafe, and so we retreat. Not because we consciously choose to, but because the body remembers what the mind forgets. You were never just avoiding silence. You were avoiding what silence triggers: the unprocessed memories, the unmetabolized pain, the unconscious fears. Jung referred to this as the tension between the persona and the shadow, the self you show the world versus the self you hide. And when the nervous system senses shadow content surfacing, it rings the alarm. The escape begins. Not out of weakness, but out of old, ingrained protection. You can't break the pattern until you recognize that it isn't a character flaw. It's a coping mechanism rooted in the body and soul. Distraction doesn't start in the mind, it starts in the body. The moment your heart rate rises, your breath shortens, your muscles tense, your system is shifting into survival mode. You feel the urge to check something, eat something, watch something. But what you're really doing is reaching for relief. And because modern life offers an endless menu of micro-escapes, we rarely pause long enough to ask, what am I trying not to feel right now? Jung emphasized that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires bringing the unconscious into consciousness. But how can we do that when the nervous system itself is trained to shut it down? We must first recognize that nervous system healing isn't separate from spiritual growth, it is the foundation of it. You cannot integrate your shadow or awaken to your deeper self if your body doesn't feel safe enough to stay present for the process. Escaping into distraction is the body's way of saying, I don't feel safe here. So instead of judging your patterns, what if you approach them with compassion? What if every escape was an invitation to listen, not to control? You are not broken, you are adaptive. But adaptation is not the same as wholeness. And if your nervous system is addicted to escape, it means some part of you, usually a much younger part, still doesn't trust stillness. The work is not to force focus, but to rebuild safety. To teach the body that it can remain in the present without danger. This is slow work, deep work, but it's the only kind that leads to transformation. As Jung might say, what you avoid controls you. But what you turn toward begins to lose its power. And in the nervous system's language, turning toward means staying, not fleeing, breathing, not reacting, feeling, not numbing. There's a part of you that hides. It's not lazy. It's not sabotaging you. It's protecting you. Jung called this the shadow, the part of the psyche where all the unacceptable, painful, and shameful elements of our past are stored. But the shadow isn't just made of rage and darkness. It's also composed of tenderness that was never met, needs that were shamed, desires that were called too much, and vulnerabilities that were never held safely. This wounded self doesn't want to be seen, not because it's evil, but because being seen once meant being hurt. So it retreats into distraction. It pulls you into avoidance. It keeps you occupied on the surface, terrified of being exposed. And every time you try to go deeper, to slow down, to be present, it whispers a warning. Don't go there. It's not safe. This is the root of your resistance. Not weakness, but a wound. Many people think healing is about pushing through resistance. But true healing begins with understanding it. The part of you that avoids, that distracts, that disconnects is doing so for a reason. Somewhere in your past, presence led to pain. Stillness led to abandonment. Vulnerability led to ridicule. And so the psyche split. The persona developed the mask you wear to appear functional, strong, together. But beneath it, the wounded self remained, quietly protecting you from re-experiencing what it never got to fully process. Jung knew that integration isn't about destroying the defenses, it's about listening to what they've been trying to protect. When you feel the urge to distract yourself, you're standing at the edge of that inner chamber, the one filled with forgotten parts of you. They're not asking you to fix them. They're asking you to see them, maybe for the first time. The wounded self lives in your body, not just your thoughts. It shows up as tightness in the chest when you try to meditate. It emerges as irritability when you try to rest. It appears in the form of shame when you're alone with your thoughts. And instead of honoring it, most people judge it. They try to overpower it with logic or suppress it with willpower. But that only deepens the wound. Because now, once again, that part of you is being silenced, just like it was before. Jung's invitation was never to bypass pain with spiritual ideas, but to enter it with presence and compassion. When you learn to sit with the discomfort without numbing, without fixing, you begin to build a new relationship with the wounded self, not as something broken to be healed, but as something sacred to be held. That's the true beginning of integration. The distraction isn't the enemy, it's the shield. And the wounded self behind it is not here to destroy your progress, it's the key to your depth. You cannot truly come home to yourself while bypassing the part of you that still trembles when silence falls. That part needs you, not your perfection, not your discipline. It needs your presence, your slowness, your curiosity. The wounded self doesn't respond to force, it responds to tenderness. It begins to reveal itself not when you demand it to, but when it feels safe enough to emerge. This is the paradox. The parts of you that cause the most disruption are often the ones that need the most love. Jung taught that wholeness comes not from light alone, but from bringing the light into the darkest corners. And when you finally turn toward the wounded self, distraction begins to loosen its grip. Not because you fought it, but because you no longer need it to. It's easy to blame technology for our disconnection. The algorithms, the endless scroll, the notifications that hijack your focus, they all play a role. But the truth is, technology didn't create your need for escape. It simply gave it more efficient tools. The urge to check your phone every few minutes doesn't start with the device, it starts with the ache. The ache of being alone with your mind. The discomfort of unscheduled time. The rawness of silence. Before the digital age, people escaped in different ways: overwork, gossip, alcohol, compulsive caretaking. Now the method has changed, but the psychology remains the same. Technology just makes the pattern more accessible, more socially acceptable, and more addictive. Jung would say we're not confronting the real issue, the internal unrest that drives the craving. Blaming the phone is easier than facing the loneliness that picks it up. Technology has become the perfect partner to the ego. The ego craves validation, identity, control. And the digital world offers it all instantly. Likes, comments, curated images, endless content. You never have to be bored, never have to feel, never have to sit with what's unresolved. But beneath this surface-level stimulation lies a deeper fatigue, soul exhaustion. Because nothing real is being touched. Jung called this the loss of soul in modern man, the disconnection from essence, from authenticity, from depth. Technology feeds the persona while starving the self. And so we become restless, distracted, emotionally fragmented. Not because the world sped up, but because we've lost the capacity to slow down. The phone isn't evil. The internet isn't the enemy. But when we use them to numb our inner world, they stop being tools and become prisons made of pixels. Every time you open your phone reflexively, there's a micro-decision being made. Avoid the moment or enter it. Stay on the surface or go inward. Technology is not the villain, but it has become the most socially reinforced escape route. Society rewards distraction. We call it productivity, entertainment, staying informed. But in truth, much of it is avoidance dressed in logic. You don't check your phone 100 times a day because you're curious. You do it because something inside feels uneasy. Something within is rising, and you don't yet feel ready to face it. Jung taught that the unconscious will find a way to express itself, whether through dreams, projections, or addictions. And so, the more we numb, the more restless we become. Not because the content is shallow, but because the soul is starving for depth. And no amount of scrolling can fill that void. So the question isn't, how do I stop using my phone so much? The deeper question is, what am I afraid to feel when I'm not using it? The distraction isn't the disease, it's the symptom. It's pointing you toward a deeper unrest that cannot be solved with digital detoxes or productivity hacks. What you're really craving isn't content, it's connection. Not external, but internal. The kind of connection that only arises when you're fully present with your inner world. When you start to see technology not as a villain but as a mirror, it changes everything. Every scroll becomes a signal. Every distraction, a teacher. Jung believed that the psyche is always guiding us toward wholeness, even through our dysfunctions. If you're constantly reaching for your device, it's not because you're weak. It's because your soul is whispering, there's something inside you that wants to be met. And you've been taught to look everywhere but there. Distraction is never random. It's not a meaningless habit or a simple lack of discipline. Every time you reach for your phone, open another tab, binge a show, or scroll without purpose, your psyche is revealing something. A need, a longing, an ache that has not yet found its voice. We often demonize distraction as laziness, but that's a shallow interpretation. Jung would remind us that the psyche is purposeful. Every behavior, even the self-sabotaging ones, is a message. When you're compulsively busy, you're not avoiding life, you're avoiding the parts of yourself you've been taught to ignore. The part that needs rest, the part that wants love, the part that doesn't want to perform today. Distraction is not failure. It is the surface-level language of a deeper emotional truth. The more you listen to it not with judgment, but with curiosity, the more it reveals. What need are you afraid to name? Is it the need to feel safe? To feel loved without conditions? To be seen without having to perform? For many, distraction becomes a shield, a way to keep the truth at bay. Not because they are afraid of the truth itself, but because they have been punished, ridiculed, or abandoned for expressing it. So the need gets buried. And in its place grows behavior, scrolling, consuming, numbing. But the body remembers. The nervous system holds the memory of unmet needs like unhealed fractures. Jung said that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. In other words, the psyche finds detours when direct healing feels too dangerous. Your distractions aren't shallow. They're protecting something tender. And the moment you stop trying to fix the habit and start asking what it's guarding, that's the beginning of inner work. You might believe that needing something makes you weak, that asking for love, attention, or safety is immature. But that belief isn't yours, it was planted. Somewhere in your life, you were taught that being strong meant being needless. That autonomy was more admirable than authenticity. So you learned to suppress your needs, and you became functional but fractured. Jungian psychology emphasizes the importance of reclaiming the lost parts of the self. And our needs, those raw human desires for closeness, for rest, for emotional nourishment, are often among the first to be exiled. When we no longer acknowledge them, they don't disappear. They morph. They become compulsions, overwork, addiction, chronic distraction. If you truly want to break free from distraction, you must ask, what am I not allowing myself to feel? What need have I judged too harshly to let it surface? There is no healing without the acknowledgement of need. It's not enough to delete apps, silence notifications, or go offline for a few days. You must go deeper, because beneath every moment of avoidance lies a younger part of you, one that never got what it was truly longing for. That's what distraction masks, the ache of unmet emotional history. But there is power in naming it, in sitting down with the loneliness, the boredom, the craving, and instead of fleeing, asking, what are you here to show me? When we dare to turn toward our discomfort with compassion, the need beneath it slowly reveals itself. And once it's seen truly, it begins to soften. Jung believed that healing was a movement toward wholeness, not perfection. And wholeness includes your needs, your longings, your emotional hunger. Distraction fades not when it's resisted, but when the message beneath it is received. We often romanticize focus. Productivity culture treats it like a virtue, a mark of discipline or high performance. But what if the inability to focus isn't laziness at all? What if it's your subconscious trying to protect you? Jung believed that much of what we avoid isn't out there in the world, but in here within ourselves. True focus demands presence, and presence brings you face to face with what lies beneath the surface, your grief, your shame, your unmet longings. The moment you sit still, the unconscious begins to stir. Thoughts you've suppressed, emotions you haven't processed, memories you've buried, all begin to rise. So your psyche resists. It creates noise, distraction, anything, to pull you away from what feels emotionally dangerous. Focus, for many, isn't unsafe because it's hard, it's unsafe because it's intimate. And the intimacy it demands is not with others, but with the truth you've been taught to avoid. Imagine sitting in silence with no phone, no task, no goal. For a split second, it feels peaceful. But then anxiety creeps in. Thoughts begin to swarm. Your body feels unsettled. That's not random. That's your nervous system reacting to the unfamiliar. You've been conditioned to live in constant motion, to treat stillness as a threat, because stillness gives the unconscious space to speak. Jung described the unconscious as a vast reservoir of psychic material, shadow, trauma, unexpressed desires. Focus opens the door to this reservoir. And for a psyche that has learned to survive through avoidance, that door feels like danger. The brain is brilliant at finding ways to escape this moment, because this moment is where your real self lives. And the real self often carries wounds. So instead of focusing, you fidget, refresh your feed, multitask. Not because you're broken, but because part of you doesn't yet feel safe to feel doubt. We often ask, why can't I stay focused? But a better question is, what happens inside me when I try? Many discover that focus brings up emotions they thought were long gone: sadness, guilt, regret, fear. Jungian work teaches that the shadow doesn't vanish, it waits. And the moment you create inner stillness, it reemerges. So your mind rebels. It craves stimulation not because it's shallow, but because stimulation keeps the shadow at bay. If you've spent years surviving through distraction, then concentration itself becomes unfamiliar, almost threatening. Focus is not just about attention span. It's about emotional capacity. It's about whether your system feels safe enough to be in one place, with one thought, one breath, one truth. And if it doesn't, that's not your fault. It means there's an invitation waiting to slowly build the strength to stay. not just mentally, but emotionally. To reclaim your focus, you must first rebuild your sense of safety. Not external safety, but inner safety, the kind that allows your nervous system to rest, your body to soften, your heart to open without fear of being overwhelmed. Jung spoke often about integration, the process of making the unconscious conscious. Focus is one of the tools of integration. But if the psyche isn't ready, it will resist. Not to sabotage you, but to protect you. This is why the path toward deeper focus isn't paved with force, but with compassion. With creating environments, rituals, and moments where stillness feels like sanctuary instead of threat. Only then can focus stop being a battleground and become a homecoming. The more safe you feel within yourself, the more attention becomes natural. You don't have to chase it. It will rise on its own, the way breath does when the panic has passed. The cycle of distraction is not broken through willpower alone. You can delete apps, unplug your Wi-Fi, throw your phone across the room, and still feel the itch. Because the impulse doesn't start in the device. It starts in the shadow. Jung defined the shadow as the part of the psyche we reject, repress, or disown, qualities we've learned to fear or believe are unacceptable. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It drives behavior from behind the scenes. Shadow work is not about fixing yourself. It's about becoming honest with what you've been hiding. If distraction has become your default, you're not lazy. You're exiled from something inside yourself. Shadow work helps you return. It invites you to ask, what part of me am I trying not to feel? What have I judged so harshly that I've pushed it into unconsciousness? Until those answers are surfaced, distraction remains the mask and the cycle keeps repeating. Doing shadow work means confronting what's uncomfortable. It means turning toward the parts of yourself you've been avoiding: your envy, your rage, your sorrow, your shame. These aren't flaws. They are human. But when we were young, many of us were taught to split our emotional selves into good and bad. The good was praised, the bad was punished or ignored. So we adapted. We buried the feelings that risked rejection and wore a mask of acceptability. That mask still operates today. Every time you distract yourself, you may be protecting that image, the one that's acceptable to others. But healing asks you to let the real come forward. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Shadow work is the act of remembering who you were before you began to hide. Only then can the distractions lose their grip, because you no longer need to hide. People often imagine shadow work as dark or dramatic, but it's often subtle. It looks like choosing to feel your frustration instead of numbing it with a scroll. It looks like letting yourself cry when you feel like distracting yourself with noise. It's choosing to sit with the ache instead of immediately fixing it. Every distraction is a doorway. Behind it, there is something tender and emotion that never got space, a truth you weren't allowed to speak. Shadow work is about giving those pieces space to exist. Not to indulge them, but to integrate them. Integration is healing. It's the moment when the you behind the behavior is finally acknowledged. The moment when presence becomes possible again. Distraction breaks not when the behavior is cut off, but when the pain it's covering is compassionately held. The cycle ends where tenderness begins. The truth is, shadow work is slow. It's not a hack. It's not a shortcut. It's a process of reintroducing yourself to the parts of you that didn't feel safe to exist. And when you do that, something profound happens. Your need for distraction decreases. Not because you're suddenly more disciplined, but because you're more whole. Jung saw healing as individuation, the movement toward inner unity. That includes not just the light, but the dark. Not just your clarity, but your confusion. Shadow work brings you back into relationship with yourself. And when you're in relationship with yourself, you no longer need to run. The silence that once terrified you becomes a space of truth. Focus that once felt impossible becomes a gift. And the presence that once slipped through your fingers becomes a home you can return to. Again and again. Stillness sounds like peace. But for many, it feels like danger. This is not a character flaw, it's a nervous system response. If you've spent your life in environments where being still meant being vulnerable, unsafe, or ignored, then motion became your safety net. Hypervigilance, overthinking, multitasking, these aren't just habits. They're protective patterns. When the body finally slows down, when the phone is put away and the world quiets, the nervous system often panics. Why? Because it associates stillness with exposure. Exposure to thoughts you've avoided, emotions you've buried, or pain you never processed. To build a nervous system that tolerates stillness, you have to teach it gently, slowly, consistently that stillness no longer equals threat. This isn't a mental shift. It's a physiological one. You're not just trying to calm down. You're trying to create a body that believes presence is safe. The nervous system can't be bullied into peace. You can't force yourself into stillness and expect it to feel good. That's why so many people fail at meditation. They sit in silence, feel the rising anxiety, and assume something is wrong with them. But nothing is wrong. What's happening is the body revealing what it's been holding. Years of internalized stress, emotional neglect, and unmet needs don't dissolve just because you decide to be mindful. The body speaks in signals, not words. Tension in your chest, restlessness in your legs, the urge to check your phone, these are not signs of weakness. They are signs of a system that's learned to protect you through activity. To retrain it, you begin small. Moments of conscious breath. 2 minutes of silence. Sitting with discomfort instead of escaping it. Each moment you stay is a message. You are safe here. Over time, that message becomes belief. Stillness is not the absence of movement, it's the presence of connection. And that connection must begin within. Most of us were not taught how to regulate our nervous systems. We were taught to achieve, to distract, to perform. But rarely were we taught how to feel. How to sit with a heavy chest and stay. How to meet a racing mind with compassion, not judgment. Building a nervous system that tolerates stillness means becoming fluent in your own signals. It means noticing when you dissociate, when you numb, when you escape. And instead of shaming those moments, you get curious. What is my body protecting me from right now? What emotion is rising that I haven't let land? This is not spiritual bypassing, it's spiritual reparenting. You become the calm presence you never had. The inner anchor you can return to, not just during peace, but especially during chaos. When your nervous system begins to trust stillness, everything changes. You don't need to chase focus, it arises. You don't fear silence, it soothes you. But this transformation isn't a destination. It's a practice, one built not on intensity, but on consistency. Jung wrote that healing is about integration, not eradication. You're not trying to erase your triggers. You're learning to hold them differently. You're creating an internal environment where your system doesn't have to fight to feel safe. Where rest isn't earned, it's allowed. Where presence isn't terrifying, it's nourishing. And the more often you return to this space, the more resilient you become, not in the hardened sense of the word, but in the soft, grounded sense. The distractions may still whisper, but they no longer rule you. Because your center is no longer. Somewhere out there, it lives in you now. Distraction is often seen as the enemy of depth, but what if it's actually a messenger? When your attention fragments and scatters, it's signaling a fracture within, a call for something more authentic. In a world that values speed and superficial connection, depth has become rare and even intimidating. To reclaim focus and presence is to step off the treadmill of constant stimuli and into a space that feels unfamiliar, maybe even uncomfortable at first. Yet this discomfort is a sign of growth, not failure. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as a process of becoming whole. By integrating the parts we've split off, depth demands integration, bringing your scattered fragments into a conscious whole. It means choosing presence over escape, curiosity over distraction. This journey is not about forcing focus, but about cultivating a grounded, embodied attention that welcomes all of you, the light and the shadow, the chaos and the calm. Reclaiming presence means embracing the paradox of modern life, the tension between external noise and internal silence. The digital age bombards us with endless options, each demanding a piece of our attention, leaving us drained and fragmented. Yet, beneath this noise lies an invitation to reconnect with the richness of your inner world. Depth isn't about isolating yourself from the world. It's about engaging with it from a place of centeredness. Imagine being fully present in pheasant, a conversation, not distracted by your phone or racing thoughts. Imagine savoring a moment without immediately moving to the next task. This presence creates a new quality of life, one that values meaningful experience over fleeting distractions. Jung reminds us that the psyche longs for meaning. It's the hunger behind all our restless seeking. When you feed that hunger with attention, distraction begins to lose its grip. But presence is a practice, not a one-time achievement. The path from distraction to depth is winding and requires patience. You'll encounter resistance, the pull of old habits, the lure of comfort. In busyness, the fear of facing the silence within. These are not obstacles to avoid, but invitations to deepen your understanding of yourself. Every time you notice yourself slipping into distraction, you have a choice to follow the familiar escape or to gently return to your center. This return is an act of courage, an assertion that your inner world matters. Over time, these small moments of mindful presence accumulate, transforming your experience of life from fragmented to whole. Jung called this the reconciliation of opposites, a dance between our unconscious and conscious, our shadow and light. Depth arises when we welcome all parts, allowing us to meet life with authenticity and grace. Ultimately, reclaiming your focus and presence is reclaiming your power. It means no longer surrendering your mind to external forces, but becoming the conscious steward of your attention. In this stewardship, distraction shifts from being a default escape to a choice you make consciously, sometimes necessary, but no longer dominating. This reclaiming reconnects you to your soul's voice, the quiet guidance that is always present beneath the noise. Jung taught that true healing and growth come from this inner connection, the place where you are not just reacting but responding from a place of depth and wisdom. When you live from this place, your life gains coherence and meaning, and your distractions lose their hold. The journey from distraction to depth is not easy, but it is profoundly transformative, a passage from fragmentation to wholeness, from fleeing to belonging, from surface to soul. Distraction is not merely a habit. It is a profound signal from the depths of your psyche, calling you to pay attention to what has been hidden, avoided, or repressed. Carl Jung taught us that the unconscious speaks in symbols and patterns, often manifesting through behaviors like escapism. When you begin to listen, truly listen, you start unraveling the layers of fear, pain, and unmet needs that fuel this addiction to distraction. This journey is not about quick fixes or sheer willpower. It is about compassionate awareness and courageous presence. Reclaiming your focus is reclaiming your soul. It means building a nervous system that can tolerate stillness and learning to welcome all parts of yourself, even those that resist. Shadow work becomes a bridge that leads. you from fragmentation toward wholeness, inviting you to integrate your wounds instead of running from them. With every moment of presence, you dismantle the hold distractions have on your life, and you create space for deeper connection with yourself and the world around you. Remember, this process is a sacred unfolding, not a race. It's the art of returning home to yourself again and again with patience and grace. In this embrace, distraction loses its power and your true depth begins to shine.